Thank you. This is working? Okay. I want to thank the organizers of the conference, David and Dragan, for including me in this. I hope I will have deserved to be included, but I'm really grateful to be here. So thank you. The other thing I'll say is that this is kind of a reworked section of this book, The Jew, the Arab, A History of the Enemy, where I'm trying to pursue what Jacques Derrida calls the abrahamic, which in my in quick rendering would be that the abrahamic is about the Jew, the Arab, something about the Christian in the middle. I used to have a photograph from Time magazine as illustration, but I lost it. The Pope, during his visit to the Holy Land, was standing between the chief rabbi of Israel, one of the chief rabbis of Israel, and the Mufti of Jerusalem. And the two were fairly indistinguishable because they both wore dark suits and ties. They had different headdress. But in the middle, the Pope was holding his hand like this, the Jew, the Arab. So the question, which I take it, I'm sorry for making light of it, it's obviously quite dramatic, actually. The Jew, the Arab, the abrahamic is the condition of religion and of politics, which is to say that it's constitutive of Europe as it thinks through or doesn't think the distinction between religion and politics. The Jew, the Arab is constitutive of Europe. And I'll just give you a quick example of what I mean when I say that it's constitutive of religion and politics. My favorite example comes from Shakespeare, where Shylock, the Jew, versus Othello, the Moor, are two plays that have barely been compared, even though Shakespeare himself actually makes the comparison between the Jew and the Moor. And of course, it would be difficult to simply identify the Moor with the Arab, though Europe keeps sliding, of course, from Moor, Saracens, Arabs, Muslims, I mean, you name it. The issue being that religion in one of the plays is foregrounded, whereas in the other it is not. No one knows what religion Othello was. So in one case you have the theological enemy, in the other you have the political and military enemy, and there's a way in which, though quite schematic, this looks backward and forward at the abrahamic. Another way to put this is that when talking about current events, one often hears a diagnostic, which is that Europe has exported its Jewish question to Palestine. And my question at this point would be, wasn't there also an export of an Arab question? Right? By saying that it's only exporting a Jewish question, one seems to erase the Arab from Europe, which of course Europe has been trying to do since the beginning. And every time it's as if the Arabs arrive, and every time it's as if they're leaving, and oh, they're still here. And you have narratives like these from really the 8th century all the way to today. So the export of an Arab question as well. There were some connections that I wanted to make with Tina Chanter's paper about the erasure of slavery that she talks about in her analysis of Casablanca. There's something about the erasure of racism, which, as she describes it, is about producing white America, right, in the figure of the couple, which is both the erasure of racism and the inscription of white America as non-racist. Something about the Semites, which seems to work in somehow similar ways. Something about the Semites having become invisible as a category. I'm not sure I want to revive the category, but it seems to me that it still functions. So I'll just read a few pages. I'll try to not read the rest of it. We'll see how it goes. Hesitations and waverings as to the names and designations that would properly describe the past and current situation in Israel-Palestine are well known, and they say much about the agenda served by each alternative, consciously or not? Who, after all, are the adversaries? Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Muslims, Jews and Arabs, political realists and religious extremists. By now notably less invisible than the term Aryan, the term Semite has lost much of its currency, even if popular perceptions continue to construe the issue in its highly segregated neighborhood in the vicinity of European racial and racist phantasms. Today, the terms Jew and Arab, echoes of not so distant shadows, remain dominant, lingering effects of an archive of paradise, as Maurice Hollander puts it. It's not just that the shift marked by these terms produces a partial excision of race, rather the shift from Semite to Jew and Arab refigures the distinction between religion and politics, ethnicity and race, while excising, as it were, the Aryan and the racial and racist elements of the equation. More importantly, perhaps, the shift both produces and sediments ancient oppositions along even older theological-political tracings, rendering its history invisible. At a most practical level, the terms Jew and Arab remain dominant because they continue to determine the daily life of millions, having been inscribed on Israeli ID cards since the earliest years of the State of Israel. There, Jew and Arab come before the law and under the heading nationality, which is distinguished from citizenship, which is Israeli. In Israel, then, Jew would continue to function as a religious, albeit de-theologized term, whereas Arab would appear to be distinct from any religious content, an ethnic and political marker, a racial and even racist category that functions as a screen for, among other things, Muslim fanaticism. In a proximate context, Bernard Lewis, of all people, documents the Eastern European genealogy of a distinction between nationality, i.e. ethnic nationality, and citizenship, a distinction which sediments ethnicity and culture, and ultimately race, into the pre-political ground of citizenship. Lewis also points out that the institutionalization of this distinction involved the transformation of religion into ethnicity, in our case, Jew, and a confinement, even a kind of eradication of religion, here Arab, which stands for and erases Muslim and Christian as an identity category. The significance of this secular institution that would leave religion behind find its origin, again, in the 19th century's denial of the solely religious character of Jewry and the attempt to redefine Jewry along national racial lines, which we heard about a little this morning. It belongs to the long history that meticulously documented by Hollander in Languages of Paradise, invented the Semites, but again, where are today the Aryans? And it can be traced as a specific political practice to the Soviet Union. The pragmatic, if not historical, reasons for this political inscription are made clear in Lewis's comments that, I quote, ethnic nationality, unlike religion, cannot be changed by an act of conversion, end quote. Whether one speaks, therefore, of Israelis and Palestinians, nationalism as the primary factor, Jews and Muslims, religion as the primary factor, or Jews and Arabs, ethnically defined with poised so-called democratic politics on the one side and fanatical religion on the other, one is never simply mistaken, but maintains rather a state of affairs that, institutionalized by the State of Israel, is the culmination itself of a difficult and still unwritten history, reinscribing invisible or uninterrogated distinctions between and within religion and politics, and between and within Semites, the Jew, the Arab. At this point, what I try to do is to basically talk about the way in which the distinction between Aryans and Semites, which was invented in the 19th century, functions very much along political and theological lines. According to Renan, in one of the most famous statements that he made, the Semites invented absolutely nothing except for the monotheistic God, the God of the desert, right? Politics, art, science, etc. was invented by the Aryans. The Semites themselves did not invent anything. In other words, they're entirely defined by their religious being, whereas Aryans are defined by their plural political being. It's a little schematic, and of course it moves from one to the other. The main point, though, is that the 19th century is, in European history, the only century that is that thinks of the Jew and the Arab as one. In other words, at any moment during the 19th century, and it kind of starts with Hegel, whatever you say about the Arab, you can say about the Jew, and vice versa. And this is the only century that thought of itself, accurately or not, as being a secular century. In other words, once the distinction between religion and politics becomes less anxiety-producing, then the Jew and the Arab can collapse one onto the other. And of course, this is over. But there are lingering effects. The Israeli law, which, by the way, sorry, I was just checking my email, and I have found out that a year ago, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, actually just canceled that category. There is no more nationality category on Israeli ID card. One of the reasons was that the Jew and Arab being the two dominant names that came under nationality or ethnicity, however you want to translate this, also multiplied. They included Druses, Circassians, and my favorite, unknown. Unknown, very theological politically, applied to Russian immigrants, the Jewishness of whom was in question. One of the ways in which the Semitic hiatus kind of continues to be with us is in the way in which Zionism, political Zionism, embodied it. And one of the issues with the Semites is, of course, they are not Europeans, they are not Aryans. Now, this is going to be incredibly simplistic, but nonetheless, the founder of political Zionism as we know it today is Theodor Herzl, who, when he was in Paris, attended the ceremony where Dreyfus, right, Albert Dreyfus, was stripped of his grades and of his of everything, and the crowd, which Herzl was listening to, of course, was screaming "Les Juifs dehors," right, Jews out, or worse. And Herzl founded political Zionism by basically saying, sure, we'll just get out, right? The anti-Semites said Jews have no place in Europe, and Herzl said, how fast can we do it? To this day, this is something that continues to structure political Zionism. The reason why I called my paper, and I'm a little anxious about this, but I'll do it anyway, the Semitic hypothesis, is because of echoes which are raised by Mahmoud Mamdani's argument in his book When Victims Become Killers, where he talks about indirect rule and the way in which colonial regimes have produced what were called subject races, basically lifting a part of the population, of the local population, telling them, well, you're not really from here, or you're not like all the others, like the majority, and you're going to help us rule. We're going to educate you, we're going to teach you our languages, and we're going to make you subject under our law, universal law, in other words, European law. The majority, on the other hand, was ruled by tribal law. You can still find traces of this even in Europe, right, where family law is, you can get married with a priest or rabbi, etc. Right, family law falls under tribal law, whereas general law is European law. So what Mamdani describes is the way in which subject races were those that were recognized as races, meaning as civilization, as having a civilizational status, whereas ethnicities were those who weren't granted that status and were ruled by local ritual tribal law. And the distinction which basically produced, at least in legal discourse, produced the distinction between Hutus and Tutsis in Rwanda, of course, is a distinction that had tremendous consequences, because those that were described as being non-autochthonous, and that's where the Hamitic hypothesis comes in, right? Just to summarize, the claim is that Africa could not have produced a civilization, and yet there was some trace of civilization. Now, the Bible had, the Bible as it was interpreted starting in the 16th century, had the three races, right? The three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japhet. The Aryan, the Semite, and the African. These were humans, right? But for biological racism, that it was a problem to grant humanity to Africa. So the way in which it worked was that the Hamites were recognized as being humans, but they had, so the Hamitic hypothesis granted to a particular group of people a non-autochthonous status, right? They were not from Africa. By the way decolonization happens, the Tutsis are actually of their own, in their own identity, and of course, with the majority, are considered to be non-local. My other absolutely favorite example of this, which Mamdani doesn't mention, is of course Algerian Jews, right, who were autochthonous, granted French citizenship, and were, with decolonization, told that they weren't from there. And of course, a large number of them also did not recognize themselves as being autochthonous, right? In other words, it works in all kinds of ways. A population is lifted, right, given different kinds of rights and a different history, and decolonization maintains that distinction, and the end of the colonial regime, and this history continues. And you can see how this works in Israel, right, with a not entirely distinct colonial history, given that the British Empire was there. We, I think, tend to forget. That's where the Pope actually could be taken out of that picture, and instead you could put, if you'd like, Jimmy Carter between Sadat and Begin, or you can, in the middle, or you can put Clinton between Arafat and Rabin. The point being that you have big white brother who lets the two somehow brown, sometimes not so brown little kids who can play along. And of course, I basically have only one question, which is the question of the Abrahamic. What separating power does the big white brother in the middle play? Right? Not bringing together, but actually what's at stake in maintaining the separation. In other words, what's at stake for Europe in claiming that the Jew is the internal enemy, the Arab the external enemy, and in maintaining the distinction, or you know, in all of its kind of embodiments in Israel and Palestine. I'll just, am I okay with time?
Yeah, you have about 7.
Okay. One of the ways in which, for me, Mamdani actually makes he himself makes comparison between Rwanda and Palestine-Israel, doesn't really develop them, but one of the moments which for me is, was quite striking was when he basically asked what would have happened if German Jews, instead of, when they came out of the camps, those who came out of the camps, instead of emigrating to Palestine, if they had stayed in Germany and asked for compensation. As you know, the compensations that the State of Israel received in the name of the victims of the Holocaust are staggering in economic terms. But if the compensation had been, we stay here in Germany, and the compensation that we ask for is one of the federal republics. Try to imagine that. Mamdani raises that issue to say, well, that's one of the issues in post-genocidal Rwanda. And this, of course, is not an option that has been pursued. So I just maybe... Maybe end here, actually. I think that's enough. Again, the question: how did the markers Arab and Jew, which are not only, as you know, on the ID cards, on Israeli ID cards, but also the way in which the New York Times repeatedly refers to the conflict in Palestine? How does the history of Semites, in other words, get translated and nonetheless maintained in Europe today, and really, I almost want to say before Israel and Palestine, Europe is what's at stake, and America is and is not Europe. and what's at stake for it, for this invisibility of the Semites. Thank you.